Hi, everybody. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. I am all by myself today because my partner in crime on this panel, Rana El-Kaloubi, who is joining on Zoom, had the misfortune of coming down with COVID. So she's joining us from her home office. Hi there, it's good to see you. She's based in Boston like I usually am, and so of course I thought I'd travel to Austin and get to spend some time with her, and turned out not to be the way. So Rana is the co-CEO of Smart Ai, and she was the founder of a company called Affectiva, which was sold to Smart Ai, which is a Swedish company. And we're going to get into all kinds of great things having to do with what the business is focused on and how AI is used in sensing human emotions and what that all means as we see AI pervade the world we live in. So I am the publisher and CEO of MIT Technology Review, which is an independent publication owned by MIT, but in a separate company. We publish all the time on the web. We do podcasts, we do conferences, etc. All the time around the topics of emerging technologies, and AI is one of the main areas that we focus on. So it's exciting to have the chance to talk to Rana. We've done this a couple times, so we have a little bit of hopefully a bit of a routine. So Rana, I'm going to get us started, and then we'll sort of take this in whatever direction seems best. So as I mentioned, she founded a company called Affectiva out of MIT, and that company was used to take facial recognition and identify the emotions that humans had on their faces. I'd love to have her talk to us a little bit about what that, how that actually played out. But Rana's also a role model for young technologists, young female technologists. She herself was an award winner of a very important award to us at MIT Technology Review, which is called the Innovators Under 35 in 2012, and I hope that doesn't betray too much about your age, Rana. In 2012, she was named one of the Innovators Under 35 in this list that we do on an annual basis, which has had pretty much everybody who's gone on to such phenomenal greatness and become household names in the tech world that you can think of. She also wrote a book called Girl Decoded, which kind of helps those of us, myself included, who aren't necessarily the most knowledgeable AI specialist to understand sort of what the important things are for us to be thinking about as advanced technologies like artificial intelligence are in place in the world that we live in, the devices we use, the offices we go in and out of, the vehicles we travel in. So I'm going to try to stand back a little bit and let Rana tell us a little bit about her story. And so before I do that, I just want to remind you, sort of by way of housekeeping, if you have questions, there is a formal way to put your questions in so that they come up to me, and then I will go through them with Rana, and we'll hopefully have a chance to engage in as many of them as we have time for. So please do interact with the Slido question application. So Rana, talk to us about the use cases of emotional AI technologies. What does this mean? What are you using this for? How is it different at Smart Ai than it was when it was your own company? Feel free to cough as much and as often as you need to. I know you're not feeling great.
I can mute.
Yeah. But anyway, take us through it, please.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. And hi, everybody. I'm so sorry I can't be with you in person, but I'm still glad that we were able to do this, albeit virtually. And I will mute that's the best thing about doing this virtual. I can actually mute when I'm coughing, so you don't have to hear me anyway. I want to kind of rewind a little bit when I was back at MIT almost 15 years ago now. The premise was, okay, so AI is becoming pervasive. It's playing a really critical role in many aspects of our lives, often taking on roles that were traditionally done by humans, for example, helping us with navigation, or maybe hiring your next coworker, driving your vehicle, like all of these like really key roles. But a lot of the emphasis on AI and building AI systems is really about the what I call the IQ, the cognitive kind of skill sets of the AI. And nobody's really kind of really focusing on the emotional and social intelligence skills of these AIs. Now, that's really important, because if these AI systems were behind the scenes and we never kind of really interacted with them, that would be okay, maybe. But we interact with these AI systems every day, multiple times an hour, right? And so it's really important that we take a human-centric approach to how we think about this, and almost draw inspiration from human intelligence. You know, we all know that it's not just your IQ that matters, your EQ, your emotional quotient, actually matters as much in terms of how you build relationships with others, how you build trust, how you lead and persuade people and motivate behavior change. Like, it's really important. So that's really what I've been focused on for the last 15 to 20 years of my career. I've been on this mission to build artificial emotional intelligence into our machines. I fundamentally believe that there are, I mean, this is going to become ubiquitous. It's just going to be the default human-machine interface. But today, there are some applications of this technology that are already in market and some that we're developing. So the ones that are in market and kind of where affective, well, actually where we started way back at MIT was for autism. So we essentially took this technology that can read your facial expressions and map it into a number of emotional states, and we packaged it into a device that looked like Google Glass, even before Google Glass existed. And we deployed it at various schools for autistic children. And we could already see that these kids were improving in terms of eye gaze kind of behavior and nonverbal communication. So that was the very first application of the technology. But when we spun out of MIT, one of the low-hanging, I would say, and initial products we brought to market was in the media analytics space. So we partner with 28% of the Fortune Global 500 companies to help them understand how people engage with their content. You know, if think of a video ad or a Netflix TV show, where do people engage? Where are they excited? Where are they bored, right? Where are they confused? So then you use this data to optimize the content. And then at Smart Ai, which was the basis of the acquisition, they're very focused on the automotive use case. So driver monitoring. Is the driver using, again, a camera sensor and all of our AI algorithms? Is the driver distracted? Is the driver drowsy, tired? Eventually, we'll be able to tell if the driver is intoxicated. And then you can expand that to other passengers in the vehicle and change the use case. So, or personalize the mobility experience. I'll stop there. There's definitely a lot of other applications, but these, I would say, are the two core ones that we are focused on. First at Affectiva and now at Smart Ai.
That's great. I don't remember if you and I have ever spoken about this, but a couple of years ago, I was in Beijing doing a conference, MIT Technology Review conference called MTech, and there was a company there that was presenting called Squirrel Ai. Have you and I ever spoken about this? So Squirrel Ai uses some version of this technology. I don't think it's quite as developed, or at least it wasn't quite as developed at the time, to look across a grade school, secondary school and elementary school classroom. And based upon similar, what you talked about with autistic children, Rana, to read how well the lessons were getting through. You can take a look at a row full of youngsters and say, that kid there, he's bored. And so it might be time to give him a more advanced lesson, or give him a chance to stretch his legs, whatever. Whereas this, the kid sitting next to him is confused, or is feeling stress, or experiencing something that's interfering with his or her learning. So, there are these wonderful ways that we can take in the emotions on a human face. I guess what I'm unaware of as a person who doesn't do this kind of stuff, I'm a publisher, is what's how do you do that? I mean, humans have all kinds of different ways of, some people, we all have had the experience that I can't read that person. I don't understand what's going on behind that person's, eyes. I can't get through. How does the technology manage to do this in a reliable way?
Before I answer that question, can I comment on this particular use case?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. So I have not seen it myself firsthand, but I know that it exists and it's deployed in schools in China. I think it's so interesting because actually and we'll get to that, it gets to the core of our conversation today, which is like the ethics of all of this, right? So if you are using this technology to get an understanding of the learner's emotional state, but you're then using the fact that, Joe is fidgeting and he's bored, to then optimize the learning experience, I think that's great. If you use the same information to punish Joe and alert Joe's parents and there's reprimanding, I think that's not okay. And so it's the same technology, but the use case can be very different. I think this is a great example because I think there's so much opportunity in the learning and like online learning space, especially now with hybrid learning spaces, to really quantify the level of engagement of a learner and be able to personalize the learning experience or detect if there's frustration or boredom. But if you use that information, against the learner, I think that's the wrong idea. So anyways, I wanted to.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I do not know if this particular example they were doing anything punitive. I sort of assume not, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either, but it's a great example because it's the same use case, but could be used in multiple ways. This is why I'm not here in person. I have to keep reminding myself. All right, so how do we build this technology? At the core of it, it's data. So we need hundreds of thousands of examples of diverse people smiling or looking confused or looking bored or excited. And then we use algorithms approaches like deep learning to train neural networks that can map these examples to an actual state, an inference. When we first started, the system was just able to detect literally 3 expressions. It could do smile, eyebrow raise, and brow furrow. And now we have a repertoire of over 40 different states. We can do everything from, and some of them are pretty advanced, like confusion or, levels of drowsiness or levels of attention. And it's all because of the data. We now have over 12 million face videos that we've collected from 90 countries around the world, which translates to about 6 billion facial frames of data. Not all of it is annotated, of course. We do have an annotation team and we need to annotate part of the data. But it's incredible. And it's the data we use to train. It's the data we use to test the system. And
where does that data, Rana, where does that data come from?
A lot of it comes from, there's 2 sources. One is when we ask people to watch a video ad, like say Coca-Cola's testing an ad, they ask for people's permission to turn their cameras on their laptops or their phones as they watch the video. And if they say yes, then we get the data of their responses. We actually don't track who they are. We just get their emotional responses. So that's one source. The other is the automotive data. And there we essentially literally send out, enroll people to install cameras in their vehicles. And then we just record their commutes. And we have about 20,000 hours of such data.
Wow. So there's a question that came in on the Slido that I want to try to adapt to connect with what you've been talking about, Rana. So the question was, if you're using this technology to help an autistic youngster who is, going through some sort of a learning process, whatever, is in class, I don't know, is doing something. The question is are we saying that someone like an autistic person is improving when they get closer to the norm, as in, I guess, neurotypical, and is that necessarily a good thing? So I think it's probably a case, Rana, of you clarifying a little bit how the use case.
Yeah, it's actually a great question, because our goal is not to, normalize these kids, but it's almost like to augment their abilities to read other people's nonverbal signals. So as it turns out, 90% of how we communicate is actually nonverbal. Like only 10% is in the actual choice of words we use. 90% is split almost equally between your facial expressions, your body posture, your vocal intonation. So if you are, a teenager at school and you're missing 90% of these signals, that's going to hurt your ability to make friends. It's going to hurt your ability to learn. And as an adult, it hurts your ability to have relationships and keep jobs. So it's actually really debilitating. And so our device was essentially designed to help these kids understand these nonverbal signals. So literally, if I had autism and I'm interacting with you, Elizabeth, it would give me real-time feedback to say, Elizabeth is nodding her head right now, right? Maybe you can ask a question, or maybe you can do that. So it was more of a conversational aid. The key question, and we're actually partnered with a company called Brain Power now, and they use our technology plus Google Glass. So they have a partnership with Google Glass, and they have about 450 of these devices deployed across the US. We're seeing improvement when the kids are wearing the device. The main question is what happens when you take the device away? Like, is the learning generalizing to, is the learning generalizing, or is it just tied to the use of the device? That's the big question right now.
Right, and which is to say, without it, are they able, is the youngster able to apply that learning to a situation when he or she's not using that augmentation?
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
exactly.
And I don't know, but it might vary depending on the individual. The youngster, it might depend on what their neurological situation is. Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to, so you started this company out of MIT, great successes, started doing lots of things with major Fortune 500 firms, use cases of all sort that we talked about. Then were acquired by a Swedish company, Squirrel Ai. What was that acquisition for? What is that? I assume that's about scaling. Talk to us about that, and then I'll tell you where I'm heading. I'm gonna want to now talk, after you tell us a little bit more about Squirrel Ai, to talk about what are the other sides of this technology that any conscientious sentient citizen is going to be wanting to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first product, as I said, was the media analytics product that we brought to market. And then in 2015, we realized that there were so many applications. Like, we were literally getting emails from, health tech companies that wanted to use our technology to understand mental health disease. We had emails from, cruise ships that wanted to understand the, engagement of their, the user experience of their customers. It was just across the board. And so for a number of years, between 2015 and I would say 2019, we essentially made our technology available to anyone who wanted to emotion enable their platform. And there's one kind of exception, and we'll talk about that in the kind of the ethics of all of this. But we quickly realized that there was a huge potential application in the automotive industry. A lot of the automotive manufacturers were standardizing on driver monitoring solutions. So we kind of went heads down in the automotive space. And one of the key competitors in the space was the Swedish company called Squirrel Ai. They've been around for 20 years. Their claim to fame is they have the best eye tracking technology in the world. they're already deployed in about 500,000 vehicles across the world, but premium brands that we would all recognize. So they were one of our competitors. And at CES 2020, right before the pandemic, I met Martin, the CEO, and I think it was this moment when we both realized that we were competing, like we were credible competitors of each other. It was interesting, but we also had this, like, we built this great relationship, and we felt that there's complementary technology. Like, we were using machine learning and deep learning, and we had an amazing data platform. They were more kind of the more traditional computer vision play. And so there was definitely areas of overlap, but also ways we really complemented each other. And so then the pandemic happened, and we kind of kept in touch. And then in the fall of 2020, we revisited, kind of the conversation started as, okay, what can we do together that could be market defining here? And we literally spoke on FaceTime every day for about 3 months. And at the end of it, he was like, wait a second, like, are you open to an acquisition conversation here? And that's, and I, for me, it was hard because Affectiva is my baby, and I have 2 kids, and I always say Affectiva was my 3rd kid. But I like to think that I've graduated my kid. It's like I haven't given up on it. It's taken a different shape with Smart Ai. So we were about 9 months into the acquisition, and we've integrated our technology stacks, and we're already seeing a lot of interest for our combined solution. So that's been nice.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. So let's talk about, you talked about the student in the classroom whose parents get a note home saying, based upon the facial recognition monitoring that we were doing, we have a feeling that, his mind was wandering, or, whatever the scenario is. And, we can agree that that's not great. What about, this idea that, I think that all of us kind of can feel somewhat comforted by the sort of emotionless nature of Alexa or Siri. There's something very reassuring about the monotone voice, and the sense that there's, this is clearly something that is not particularly sophisticated, and not nearly sophisticated enough to be able to really understand. It's both maddening and kind of, I think, reassuring. So how are we meant to feel about this idea that the artificial intelligence technologies are getting much better at understanding us? You were talking about 90% of communication being nonverbal. Anybody who's been in a long marriage can tell you that, right? So it's not what you said, it's how you said it, right? So how are we meant to sort of think about this monitoring, inverted commas monitoring, that these technologies are presumably going to get better and better and better and better and better at? Talk us off the edge here, Rana.
Okay. Well, first of all, I guess I want to say I'm an optimist, but I'm not naive. There are definitely ways with which we can use this technology to discriminate against people, to spy on people. So it can go wrong. And, we realized that way back at MIT. So my co-founder is Professor Rosalind Picard. She runs the affective computing group at the MIT Media Lab. And she wrote the book, and she started this whole field. And so when we started Affectiva, she and I literally sat around her kitchen table in her house before we had an office or anything. And we said, okay, like, where this can go in many different directions, how are we going to draw the line? And we literally put some core values in place that ended up being not only kind of our North Star as a company, but it informed our business strategy. So for example, we said, we're not going to engage in any business use case where people do not have the opportunity to give explicit consent. So not opt out, but actual opt in. And so that meant, for instance, or where the person whose data is being kind of, collected, doesn't have an opportunity to gain anything from sharing this data. Like this power asymmetry where, a number of organizations own a ton of data about you, but you as a consumer, you're not really getting anything in return for it. We also kind of wanted to rebalance that power asymmetry. So that meant that, for instance, applications in the surveillance and security space, we've just consistently over the last 12 years, we just say no. And we routinely get inbound from the US government and from other governments to use this technology to identify, lie detection is one example, or, outlier behaviors in airports. And we often, I wouldn't say often, but occasionally as a company, we will have the debate, especially as security considerations change in our society. We say, okay, is it now the right time to do this? And so far, we just land on, no, it's not the right time. The regulation isn't in place for all of this to be done properly. If you build accidentally some bias into the algorithm and now you deploy it, across the world, you're exacerbating the bias that exists in society. And so I just don't think it's the right use of the technology. And not only have we stayed away from it as a company, I'm very vocal about not using this technology in surveillance and security and lie detection use cases.
So MIT Technology Review, as I mentioned, we're constantly writing stories about the uses of technology, the unforeseen consequences of the uses of technology. We want to tell the stories about all these incredible things that these brilliant minds like yours are bringing to our world. And we also want people to go into the decision making that they may make, and decisions they may take in their own homes or in their own businesses or whatever, with a certain amount of eyes open. So what you've said is very reassuring, and I'm also an optimist. And yet we live in a world that's not everybody, perhaps takes that kind of view. Other folks may take a different approach to the phone calls from the, State Department or whoever, Homeland Security. And so when you think about creating technology, which is what you and your teams have been doing these years, to what extent do you think about the possibilities that it might be used by the next company that is standing on your shoulders, the shoulders of the great work that you've been doing, and what are your responsibilities there, and how do you think about how do you think about acting responsibly?
Yeah, I think as a tech leader, as tech leaders, all of us, right, in this space, it is our responsibility to be vocal about this and raise the bar, and kind of highlight where things can go wrong. So for example, before the acquisition, Affectiva was a member of the Partnership on AI Consortium, PAI, which was started by the tech giants a number of years ago in partnership with civil liberty organizations like ACLU and Amnesty International. And it was amazing because it was a multi-stakeholder consortium of people who often don't get together, right? And they invited a number of startups, so we joined. And we embarked on this year-long project where we identified proactively all of the different use cases of emotion AI. And we had these heated debates around where they could go wrong. Like, what are the unintended consequences? Which doesn't actually happen a lot in tech, right? Like, you basically deploy the best case scenario out there.
Right.
And then,
unfortunately, it doesn't often happen in tech. That's right.
Yeah, you probably have a lot to say about that. Do you want to add a little bit of color?
I think, we can all think of ways in which, just remember the Arab Spring. And we thought, oh, look how wonderful social media is and how great, and then, over the course of the years in between, we no longer think that, unfettered access to social media is a force of social good. I think it's safe to say.
Right, exactly.
There's many examples, but that's just one that comes to mind.
Right, and putting the effort in to try and identify what are the ways in which it could go wrong, I think is a really helpful exercise. and again, like having multiple points of views, not just having the tech innovators, go through this exercise, actually having other stakeholders basically poke holes and say, well, have you actually really thought about this? Like what's going to happen if this, if this company takes it and does this with it? So, and we published it as a white paper. I think the challenge is, okay, how do you then action it? Companies like us action it by being very clear about our ethics roadmap, basically. I also think now we're starting to see more and more tech investors care about this, which is awesome, right? Because if they start scrutinizing early stage startups for their, how are they implementing ethics into their algorithms or mitigating data bias or algorithmic bias, then the companies are going to start paying attention to that. And investors or customers or client, right? Like the more people know about this, I think the easier it will be to raise the bar. And then the companies who don't adhere to any of these standards, hopefully will kind of,
Yeah, and what we need is, some policy making teeth as well. And, we that's not the topic of this conversation, but we could have a whole conversation about what in this country, in Washington is and is not able to understand about the technologies of the sorts that you're describing. What it can do and what kinds of safeguards need to be put in place to, move us further back from the unintended consequences. So I have a question that came in, which I think is right up your street, Rana. It's law, religion, and education. These were all, all of these were developed without the systems that we have around law and education and religion, they are all developed without a gender perspective. Maybe not. But the question is, what role do you see feminism taking in AI and the development of AI?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Actually, I'll take a stab at it, but Elizabeth, do you also want to answer it too? I think that's a really
sure. You go first.
Okay. So here's what I'm thinking. First of all, just an umbrella statement on diversity, right? Like as we design these technologies, the more diverse people sitting around the table, kind of developing, designing, and deploying these things, the better it's going to be for everyone. It's just going to work for more people. So just like having a diverse perspective on solving the problem is really important. And it's not just the diversity of the data, it's actually the team designing all these things. So I'll just give one example. Most of our data annotators are based in Egypt, in Cairo, Egypt, where I'm originally from. And a lot of them are women who wear the hijab. So they wear a headscarf. And one time, they reached out to me and they said, our job is to watch these videos of people making all these expressions and annotating them. And we've never, ever seen a hijabi woman in the data set. Now, that was not intentional. It was an oversight. But because we have this diverse team, they were able to actually flag that this is a gap we had. And obviously, you can apply that on age and gender and ethnicity and whatnot. So that's an example where just having different brains around the table is important. And then the second kind of thought I had is just the role of empathy. I do not want to make a statement that women are more empathetic than men or not at all. But I just think, again, like bringing an empathetic view to this problem of AI, but also even like leadership. When I stepped into the CEO role, I was the CTO of Affectiva. And in 2016, I stepped into the CEO role. And I just decided I'm an empathetic leader. I'm totally going to embrace that. And so, so just, I guess, owning that feminism, our logo was bright pink. And I know we have like this bright pink car, hot pink car that drives around Boston collecting data. I was like, yeah, we're just going to own that, we're pink. So,
Yeah, I mean, I have to say,
I don't know if this answers the question.
I think the thing about, the reality about feminism is that it's, there are many different ways you can, many different ways and forms you can enter it and apply it. And, the challenge with AI is the data. And to the example of the hijabi women who didn't see themselves in the data, and therefore, the outcomes were not going to connect with their own outcomes, their own realities. Are there people on your on your team who are paying attention to this or not? And what's the way you make working for Effectiva Smart Ai accessible and enjoyable and edifying in all kinds of ways for anyone you might employ. And I will say that having been to one of your events, there is a lot of pink, and it is quite joyful as well. I don't know if that's something you've got figured out with Smart Ai, but might have been in the fine print.
Yeah, they're mostly their brand colors are mostly like yellow/mango, but
Okay.
we inject the pink.
Fabulous.
Like that.
Yeah. So just connected to this, can you talk to us about Girl Decoded and what inspired you to write that book?
Yeah, so Girl Decoded is my memoir, and it follows my journey growing up in, I was born in Egypt, we're Egyptian, but I grew up around the Middle East. I was in Kuwait during the first Gulf War in 1990, and, we had to evacuate. And so I talk about what is it like to grow up as a young woman in the Middle East. Both my parents are technologists, and they've really supported, I have two younger sisters, they've supported our education. But there was always this tension between cultural norms and abiding by what's expected of us in society, and then being these ambitious young women, daughters, that my parents had. So I talk a lot about that. And then, so the book follows my journey, growing up in the Middle East, studying at Cambridge University, doing my PhD there, and then coming to MIT and starting the company. But at the same time, it's intertwined with the journey of emotion AI. It didn't exist. And I try to really simplify what is emotion AI? What are the use cases? What are the ethics and moral implications of this technology? And so I really wrote it for a broad audience. I did not want to write an AI book. And the main reason is I really believe that the more, lay people are involved in the AI conversation, the better it is going to be for all of us, because again, we can start to ask as consumers questions around data privacy. How's the data being used? What's the data collected? How's it being used? Who has access to it?
Yeah, I mean, boy, do I relate to that. I mean, one of the things that you and I have spoken about, so MIT Technology Review, as I mentioned before, is, we are an independent media company owned by MIT. We publish content all the time for any of us, all of us. When I first joined the company, people were, lots of people who didn't have experience with MIT Technology Review assumed it was going to be very academic, assumed it was academic journals, academic articles, and thought, I don't know, that's not for me. I didn't go to MIT, or I'm not a STEM person, or whatever the comment was. But what I find, just as you said, is to have more people in these conversations who aren't like you, Rana, but who are more like me. I have a business background. I mean, I'm not a technologist per se, except insofar as anyone who's running a company today has got to have their act together on technology. But I find that there's this accessibility to bringing these questions to find that you can actually have a conversation with someone who's as knowledgeable as you are, and get into a really interesting ethical conversation is an important part of being sort of tech literate today.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Following up on that. What role do you see, or role you play, and MIT Tech Review plays, in kind of bringing these stories to people who are non-domain experts? And some of it is really inspiring, right? Like big thinking, inspiring stories, but some of it is investigative and kind of challenging the tech creators. Can you say more about?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the question. I mean, I think At the heart of it, we are, our mission and the mission that we, are engaged with as journalists, and in my case, on the business side of journalism, is to tell the stories that help all of us be more literate, more cognizant of what is happening and shaping the world that we live in. And, at the heart of it, at the core of it, we have a foundational belief that with the brilliant minds and even the mediocre minds, all the minds working together to come up with can come up with solutions to really hard problems. And boy, do we have a hell of a lot of really hard problems in front of us. We've obviously just come through, I hope, I pray, just come through the pandemic. The innovations that went into the mRNA vaccine, which I have 3 times in my arm, enables me to be here and have never, knock wood, fallen sick to COVID yet. Enables us to, gather together. And yes, we've lost a lot of lives to COVID, but we've also saved so many phenomenal lives. Those innovations came out of MIT. But, there's lots of other things that need to come after that. We're this existential crisis around climate in our environment is, bearing down on us like a speeding train, and bringing together all of the intelligence of people who care about the same issues is a path out. So that this mission that we have is that technology always has and can continue to make the world a better place. And so what we're trying to do are these kinds of conversations like you and I are having here. What are the wonderful use cases of the technology? What are the great ways it can make our lives better and richer, enable us to do things we never could before? But hold on a second. Should we be talking about other things that could lie underneath? And so, just to connect back to that, I'm interested in the data. We talked about the data, right? And there's a couple of things that, you and I were talking about GPT-3, and it might be helpful if you explain what that is to the audience, and you probably do a better job of it. But essentially, GPT-3 is a kind of AI that takes written text, that's ubiquitous, as we know, and is able to create more text based upon the text that's fed into the AI. But as you might imagine, garbage in, garbage out, or bias in, bias out. So what do you think about when you're looking at data sets, and what are ways that you think it's an important conversation for this group to be thinking about?
Yeah, GPT-3 is such a great example because, again, it unlocks so many amazing use cases, but also it can go terribly wrong. So I'm Muslim, and I was reading up on how, if you feed GPT-3, the following sentence, you say, a Muslim walks into, right? It will literally autocomplete the sentence. I think 2 out of 3 times it's going to be terrorist related, which isn't GPT-3's problem. It's the problem of the data that we're using to train it with, right? So all the narratives that it's being fed around Muslims is primarily, violence related. But I think the thing that we need to realize is that this isn't a technology problem, it's the people problem. We, as, again, the people who are designing and deploying these technologies, we have to scrutinize the data we're using. We have to be really thoughtful about what data we're using. Otherwise, we're just mirroring all the biases that exist in society and again, multiplying it and exasperating it. So I just feel very strongly that we can't just lay the blame on technology. We have to take responsibility for that. And we see that all the time in the data we're using to train the algorithm. Facial recognition has been under scrutiny for the last few years because some of the facial recognition technologies out there were just primarily trained on middle-aged white men. And so it may or may not recognize a person that looks like me, right? Because it hasn't seen any examples of people who look like me. So yeah, the diversity of the data, or mitigating, I guess, algorithmic bias actually starts with mitigating data bias. And to mitigate data bias, you just have to really be thoughtful and intentional about how are you getting this data and what's the definition of diverse? What are all the different angles that you want to represent in your data set? And this is where synthetic data comes in.
Yeah. So we were talking about synthetic data. So I'm just going to one more plug for MIT Tech Review. Each year we put together a list of the 10 breakthrough technologies that we think are coming out of labs and into the marketplace that we think are going to change the way we live and work in the future. We've been doing this for 20 some odd years, and this year's list went live about 2 weeks ago. And one of the items on the list that you and I were talking about was synthetic data as a way of mitigating the impact of bias in data. So are you using synthetic data? What is synthetic data? Is somebody making it up? What is this? Help us understand that.
Yes, so the answer is yes, we are absolutely using synthetic data. We partner with companies that specialize in building synthetic data. An example is synthesis.ai, but we also have our own in-house tools as well. So if we step back, collecting and annotating data is just so immensely expensive and time consuming, right? So the 12 million face videos that I mentioned, which is about 6 billion facial frames, that took us years to collect, and it's going to take us years and years to annotate. I think we've annotated less than 2% of this data so far, even though we have a team of about 100 people who are just continuously kind of, working on it. Synthetic data is amazing because you can simulate the creation. You can literally create synthetic human beings, right? You can say, I don't have enough South Asians in my data set. I would like to simulate South Asian looking people. And I want, these people to be mostly women, and I want them to be, middle-aged women and wearing baseball caps or maybe facial masks, right? Like with the pandemic, we had to retrain everything with facial mask data because that's the reality of our world today. And you can do that literally at the click of a button. It will take a few minutes to generate, and it's already annotated because it's synthetic. So you already know how you generated this data. So we're not at a point now where we can use just synthetic data for training or validation. But I would say the mix is maybe 30% synthetic data and the rest is actual real data. But I think it's going to shift more towards synthetic data.
Fantastic. And I guess presumably it really is as described. It will eliminate the kind of bias that we've talked through.
Yeah, I think it will definitely help with that. You still have to be thoughtful about how you train and validate these algorithms. When I did my PhD 20 years ago, I just reported on the accuracy of, say, a smile classifier or a brow furrow classifier. That's not good enough now because it's very easy to hide the bias if you're just reporting one high-level accuracy score. What we started to do in the last few years is we say, okay, so the smile classifier is 98% accurate, but how is it doing on subpopulations? Like, let's look at how it's doing on males versus females, right, or older people versus younger, or African American, and that's how you uncover the bias. So it's not just the data, it's the data and how you look at these results. And we're seeing a shift in the industry, and actually we're seeing new companies pop up, new startups like Credo.ai and Arise and Fiddler that are providing tools that help companies institutionalize some of these, buttons to mitigate bias.
Yeah. I want to turn to some Q&A, Rana. I've gone through a couple of them as we've gone along, but there are a few I haven't had a chance to get to. Quickly, what do you see as trends in the machine learning space in 2020? What are you paying attention to especially closely?
Data synthesis is definitely one of them. The other is multimodal.
Yes.
I think was that one of the 10 trends?
2 years ago, it was one of the 10 trends. Okay. Yeah, multimodal was, yeah.
Exactly. So Affectiva primarily does computer vision, but even within vision, you could have, different vision sensors, but you can also integrate voice as well, and maybe even radar, like integrating multiple sensors to get a better understanding of an environment or a person or persons, I think is really exciting. So that's an area we're definitely championing. other areas, I mean, I'm really interested in the application of emotion AI in health and mental health. It's been something we know that there are facial and vocal biomarkers of mental health disease like depression, anxiety, even suicidal intent, but we've never been able to scale that.
Right.
There's a number of companies that are working on this problem. Videra Health is one where you can literally just use your phone and do a short video interview. And
Wow.
using emotion AI, it can flag if you're deviating from your baseline and kind of pass that on to a doctor to reach out. Yeah, so that's like I think it has just an amazing potential for transforming mental health disease.
Wow. All right. So a couple more questions. Facial expressions mean different things in different cultures. I think you touched upon this a little bit when you talked about the hijabi, the absence of hijabi women in the data set. But facial expressions mean all kinds of different things. When someone says no in certain cultures and they kind of do this thing with their eyes, that might mean something different in one country versus another. So how does emotion AI take that into consideration, Rana?
It is actually complex, and this is why I think this is a non-trivial problem. Often people think, well, how hard is it to detect a smile? It's actually pretty hard if you consider the different ways people express emotions across the world. Most facial expressions are universal, but there are cultural differences in the meanings of some of the facial expressions, but actually also the magnitude, right? So we literally do have this scatter plot where we plot the intensity of the emotion by geography, and we're able to see, Brazilians are actually way more emotive than, the average person in Japan. Mm-hmm. So sure. Being thoughtful about how we interpret the data is very important.
A couple questions that are connected that came in. One was, what if I don't want you to read my emotions? Can I turn them off? Can I turn that off in some specific situation? And related to that, there was another question about, are you asking people for permission, for their consent before you gather this data on them?
Yeah, we absolutely ask people for their consent. In the media analytics space, in fact, it's not just hidden, we literally have it in plain English. Like, we are going to turn on the camera now while you're watching. You have the option to say yes or no. So if you say no, you can still continue watching, obviously. So that's very important for us. In the automotive industry, when it's deployed in a vehicle, none of the video gets recorded. So it's just doing analysis of your eye tracking behavior and your level of distraction and fatigue in real time, and then giving you alerts, but none of the data goes anywhere. It's not recorded. Mm-hmm. And that was an important design decision.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There was another question up there. How do you think about what if it works? That's one question. Versus what if it doesn't work when you evaluate the ethics of a new technology?
So say we kind of think through the ethics of a particular use case and we don't think that's the right use case.
Yeah.
I like to think of it as like different scopes. Like, the closest scope where I have the most control over is obviously my company. And I basically say, we're not doing this. And we could stop at that, but we don't. We basically try to engage with the community, whether, I'm on stage trying to say, okay, this is not a good use of our money and time to deploy this technology in this particular industry. So I'm a huge advocate, and we try to, include our competitors in the conversation as well. I think a lot of our point of view is shared by at least kind of the Western, I'd say, competitors. Maybe, some of our Chinese competitors have a different point of view around ethics and data privacy in general.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think being an evangelist and being very vocal about this is really key.
It would seem to me, Rana, and I don't know how comfortable you are sharing a little more about this, but the process of selling the company must have required, you mentioned how you spoke to Martin, every day. You really knew him.
Yeah.
But I imagine, if that had been Facebook, that you might have been a different set of emotions, speaking emotionally, since I know we can speak emotionally. And I'm interested in, can you say a little bit about how did you know how did you know that was going to be a good home for this technology that has such a responsibility that goes along with it?
Yeah, Martin and I had multiple conversations about kind of the use cases and the ethics of all of this. And I felt that we shared the same core values. That was actually one of the core, one of the core factors in evaluating whether this would be a good, we had multiple contenders, and I just felt that, actually Martin and I, he will literally say the same, like we share the same vision of this technology. We want to bridge the gap between humans and machines. We want to humanize technology. And we believe that the world can be a better place because of that. But we also recognize it can go terribly wrong, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that, our technology is not used in these use cases. So we've had multiple conversations. I feel like the two teams share the same core values, and that was important.
Yeah, I can imagine that your investors might have. It's important your investors felt the same, because of course they could have said, no, we want you to sell to they're going to pay us more. This other group is going to pay us more, and that's important to us. And I'm certain that as well as that worked out, that there are other examples that don't work out in quite the same way. That the buyer may not share the same core values, which you're certainly very fortunate to be in that situation.
But I think actually our investors, again, I feel very fortunate, but I also think it was like a process of, when we were deciding how to take money, we took money from investors who actually cared about these things. At all of my board meetings, I always gave an update on how we're thinking about kind of the ethical development and data and diversity. And I think that kind of highlighted that it was a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like it was important to the company, and so it attracted investors that cared about this, and so ultimately, I felt like we were aligned, and that's my advice. If there's anybody in the audience thinking about starting a company or raising money from investors, it's not just about the money. Obviously, the matching of the core values is really, really key. Because you're right, it will, at some point, you're going to have to make decisions. And if you're not aligned on these core values, it's going to be an issue, right?
Right. Yep. All right. A couple more questions I want to try and get to, Rana.
Yeah.
Let's see. So if you're gathering facial recognition data from people watching ads or in cars, are you getting data that's showing genuine showing genuine love or joy? And if not, what are other approaches that you're taking, I guess, to collecting that kind of data?
Yeah, a lot of the data of people watching content is obviously provoked by the content, so it is in response to the content. The automotive data, however, oh my God, we've just seen the full range. It's like fascinating, actually, because we thought that people know, people installed the cameras. We gave them the cameras and they put it in there. They know about it. But they forget about it. And we've just seen a wide range of emotional and social expressions in these cars. Some of it, I'd say, not very safe, but it is fascinating.
Right. Fantastic. Okay. Can this technology be used to train or augment the 90% nonverbal ability of sensory limited individuals, like those who are visually or hearing impaired?
Oh, that's a great use case. The visual impaired in particular is one that I just think is an obvious use case. My PhD office mate was visually impaired, and he would often say the thing he misses the most is just not knowing how people are responding to his conversations. Like, right. He doesn't know if people are interested or not. He can't tell. And so I think that's a great use case.
Yeah. So we are at the end, Rana, can you believe it? And the team here at South by takes it seriously, the timing. So there are more questions. I'm sure folks can find you on on Twitter and at you and maybe keep the conversation going. I really appreciate your being such a trooper and joining us. And the coughing sounds like it might be getting better. So we'll hope you'll be on the mend very soon, and doubly super immune as a result. So that's the silver lining for it. And I thank everyone for being here and joining us, and encourage you all to go to technologyreview.com to read all kinds of wonderful stories about people like Rana and companies like Affectiva Smart Ai, and big ethical questions about what it all means. So thanks again, Rana. Thank you all, and thanks to the folks at South by.